You're standing at the edge of an airfield before dawn, where the grass is wet and the silence feels almost alive. The world hasn't quite decided to wake yet. Not the birds. Not the engines. Not even the horizon, which lies dim and indifferent, a thin grey line waiting for light to gather behind it. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing, and tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. The pilot places one hand on the cockpit rail, eyes fixed on the awakening sky. And as the engines begin to grow, somewhere far beyond the clouds, you understand that the Battle of Britain is not a story of domination, but of endurance, a nation breathing through fear, one morning at a time. You're listening to echoes of war. You breathe in the cold, and it tastes faintly of metal, the scent of fuel, damp earth, and a night that hasn't fully let go. Somewhere in the haze ahead, a single hurricane sits motionless, its wings beaded with dew, canopy closed like a sleeping eye. And beside it stands a pilot, young, motionless, wrapped in a heaviness that doesn't come from the morning air. You don't know his name yet. You don't need to. The way he stands, hands in pockets, chin lowered, tells you everything that words won't. He is listening, not for orders, not for engines, but for the first subtle shape of danger drifting across the sky. You can feel it too. A faint hum behind the silence. A tension as thin as paper, stretched between night and the day about to break. A van door shuts quietly somewhere behind you. Boots move along the tarmac. A mechanic coughs softly as he checks something beneath a wing. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is loud. Everything feels suspended, as if the entire country is holding its breath with the dawn. The pilot finally moves, a small shift of weight, a glance upward, as though expecting the sky to answer a question he hasn't asked out loud. In the half-light, he seems almost carved from the morning itself, pale, quiet, a little hollowed by responsibility. Yet there's something steady in him too, a stillness that has nothing to do with peace. The war has not arrived on this field yet, but it is close. A gust of wind slides across the grass, carrying with it the faintest echo of distant engines, or maybe that's only your imagination, stirred by the tension of the moment. Still, you listen, and in the quiet, your heartbeat feels like a small, steady drum inside your chest. Somewhere across the channel, wings are already rising. Somewhere beyond the horizon, metal is gathering in formations that glitter like dark constellations. Men you will never meet are climbing into cockpits with thoughts similar to the pilot beside you, a hint of fear, a hint of resolve, a hope that daylight will be kind. A soft light finally stretches across the runway, brushing the edge of the hurricane's fuselage. The pilot turns his head toward it, as though the sun were an officer stepping out of the dark to issue silent orders. You watch him inhale deeply, a slow, grounding breath, and something inside you shifts with it. Not fear, not anticipation, something quieter. The recognition that courage often begins in moments just like this. Not when engines roar, not when bullets fly, but when the world stands still and a single human being chooses to move anyway. In the distance, a dog barks once. A pair of mechanics walk by with a toolbox that rattles softly. No one speaks. Radios crackle faintly from a nearby hut, the voices low and clipped. The day is assembling itself piece by piece, careful as clockwork. You might wonder what courage feels like in weather like this, in a dawn that is neither gentle nor cruel, only watchful. It feels, perhaps, like this pilot's breath misting in the cold, like fingers tapping an almost invisible rhythm against his leg, like a mind that runs ahead into the sky, imagining what may come, then returns quietly to the present moment. The air changes. You sense it first, a subtle pressure, a shift in temperature, the way silence rearranges itself. Then the pilot hears it too. His head tilts slightly. Eyes narrow. A low vibration threads through the stillness, faint but undeniable. Engines. Distant. Waiting to be answered. He doesn't rush. He doesn't harden. He simply becomes more awake, more present in the space he occupies. A hand slides slowly across the metal of the aircraft. His breath deepens. The morning finishes unfolding around him, pale gold slipping across the field like a quiet tide. Soon, someone will shout an order. Soon, the ground crew will sprint. Soon, wheels will leave the earth, and the calm you feel now will be replaced by the violence of sky meeting machine. But not yet. For one final moment, everything holds. The airfield, the sky, the man beside the hurricane. Even the war itself seems to pause at the edge of the horizon, waiting for the day to begin. Chapter 1. When the island started listening. After the sea went quiet. Night has ended, but the day doesn't feel fully born. You stand now not on an airfield, but further back in time, on a beach that has just been abandoned. The sand is stamped with thousands of footprints, but almost no one remains to make them. Dunkirk has emptied. The last boats have pulled away. The sea has gone strangely quiet, as if exhausted by the weight of all it has carried. You imagine the silence afterward. Discarded helmets half buried in the sand. A single boot filling slowly with tide water. Burned-out vehicles rusting in shallow waves. The battle here is over, but the war has not left. It has only shifted its gaze. Behind you, across the channel, a country is counting its losses and running its fingers along a map that has suddenly shrunk. France has fallen. The Low Countries have collapsed like a line of fragile dominoes. Germany stands on one side of the water. Britain stands on the other. And for the first time in centuries, the island feels truly alone. You might think of those days as loud. Speeches, alarms, marching boots. But much of it is quieter than that. It's the sound of papers being spread across tables, of pens scraping over maps, of an entire government leaning over the same question. What happens now? The answer is not written in the sea anymore. It has moved to the sky. A map turned toward the air. In Berlin, fingers trace different lines over different maps. They slide from the coast of France, up to the channel ports now in German hands, and then across that narrow strip of water to the outline of southern England. The plan is simple in shape, complex in execution. Soften the island from the air, then cross the water and break it on the ground. The Luftwaffe, which had roared across Poland and Western Europe, now stands at the edge of its next great test. Fighter wings and bomber groups assemble at airfields along the French and Belgian coasts. Men who once flew over forests and fields now look out toward open water, toward an enemy they cannot reach without crossing a blue, shifting barrier. On the other side, in Britain, the response is not grand in appearance. There is no single sweeping movement that looks powerful from the sky. Instead, there are small, steady acts repeated 1,000 times. Mechanics learning new routines with unfamiliar aircraft. Ground crews marking runways with tins of oil and scraps of cloth. Women in operations rooms pushing counters across vast table maps with long wooden rods. The country does not rise in a single wave. It stiffens one muscle at a time. You watch as fighter command structure takes shape in your mind, like a nervous system laid over the landscape. At the top, a single nerve center at Bentley Priory, where decisions will be made in rooms lit by shaded lamps and large wall charts. Below, group headquarters, sector stations, squadrons dispersed across the south and east of the island. You might wonder how a country prepares to meet a storm like the one coming. It does not shout. It listens. The quiet lines of radar. Along the eastern and southern coasts, strange structures rise out of fields and dunes, tall, skeletal masts of metal and wood, standing like unfinished cathedrals. To someone passing by, they might look like odd, utilitarian sculptures, or perhaps radio towers without clear purpose. But in the dim hum of their equipment, something radical is happening. This is Chain Home, Britain's early warning radar network. Lines of stations strung along the coast, their beams sweeping the sky with invisible fingers. Inside those stations, in rooms that smell faintly of dust, oil, and warm electronics, operators watch flickering screens. The images are crude by later standards, jagged traces, faint spikes of light on cathode ray tubes, but to trained eyes they mean everything. You picture one of those operators, a young woman sitting in the glow of a screen while the outside world still sleeps. Her headphones rest lightly against her hair. Her pencil hovers over a plotting sheet. The room is quiet except for the murmur of machines and the occasional low voice. On her display, a small echo appears where there was nothing before, a tiny disturbance in the steady line of the sky. She frowns, leans closer, marks the range and bearing. Another echo. Then another. She speaks softly, passing numbers along a chain of voices. In another room, someone listens, then moves a counter on a large table map. At group headquarters, a controller watches these counters multiply into a pattern, a raid forming far out over the water. You can almost hear the system waking up. Not with sirens, not with panic, but with measured responses. Pens move. Phones ring once, then twice. Orders begin to flow. You might not think of electricity and radio waves as emotional things, but here they feel almost like a sense of touch. The country extending its awareness into the sky, learning to feel incoming danger long before it can be seen or heard. The Battle of Britain will be fought with wings and guns, but it will also be fought with this, a network of listening posts and human attention stretched along the coast like nerves under skin. Names without applause. On the airfields themselves, the men who will fly are waiting, much like the lone pilot you met at dawn. They are not carved from legend yet. They do not know that in later decades their faces will appear in books, their squadrons listed in quiet memorials, their numbers recited with reverence. Right now, they are simply people in borrowed time. Some still smell of the sea from Dunkirk. Some are new arrivals from far away, from Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Poland, Czechoslovakia. Some have flown only a handful of combat sorties, their logbooks thin but their training dense with repetition. You watch them as they sit in deck chairs outside dispersal huts, mugs of tea cooling in their hands, newspapers folded unread on their laps. They do not look like a shield yet, only a scattered collection of young men in uniforms that hang a little differently on each frame. Nearby, ground crews move around the aircraft with a different kind of calm, methodical, hands blackened with oil, conversation minimal. They check fuel lines, ammunition belts, control surfaces, tires. They know that the pilot's life and the squadron's survival may hinge on a single bolt tightened correctly, a single leak found before it matters. You might find it strange how ordinary it all appears. How much of this great battle begins in routine? Checklists, log entries, scheduled maintenance, rotations, waiting. But that is how endurance often works. Not in grand gestures, but in the refusal to let small tasks slip. Somewhere in this mesh of quiet diligence is a man like Douglas Bader, whose missing legs have not kept him from flying, whose stubbornness will make him both admired and exhausted. Somewhere else is a leader like Sailor Mallon, whose measured calm will steady others. You glimpse them only in passing, silhouettes crossing the edge of your vision, voices on the wind. The script of heroism is not being read aloud here. It is being written silently in how they sit, how they smoke, how they nod to one another without too many words. You might wonder how they feel, really. Afraid, excited, numb. The truth is that feeling becomes less important than readiness. There is no time to explore each emotion fully. The war, like the weather, is approaching, and they must be ready when it arrives. A country of listeners. Beyond the airfields and operations rooms, the rest of Britain adjusts its breathing in smaller ways. In coastal villages, people look out from cliffs and piers, scanning the horizon for shapes that do not belong, fleets that might appear, parachutes that might bloom unexpectedly against the sky. Children listen to adults talk in low voices they're not supposed to hear. Windows are taped. Sandbags are piled. Shelters are prepared beneath stairs and in back gardens. In cities, siren drills become part of the rhythm of life. Shopkeepers glance up at the sound of aircraft overhead, learning to distinguish by ear the difference between friendly and foreign engines. Factory workers hear the roar of test flights from distant airfields and look briefly at one another before returning to their machines. Across the island, the war has settled into the air itself, not always as noise, but as awareness. The nation is not merely waiting. It is listening. You may think of the Battle of Britain as a series of dogfights, of dramatic climbs and spiraling descents. That will come. The sky will fill with trails of exhaust and smoke, and the calm you feel now will be punctured by sudden violence. But before that, there is this, a kind of collective inhalation, a moment in which an island turns its face toward the sky, not in triumph, not in despair, but in readiness. You stand again, in your mind, at the edge of that dawn airfield, the hurricane beaded with dew, the pilot half-shadowed by the growing light. Behind him, unseen but vital, the radar masts hum along the coast, the plotting tables await their markers, the civilians of 100 towns stir in their sleep. Somewhere out over the channel, engines are already forming into patterns that will soon become raids, sorties, counterattacks. But for now, the sky holds its breath, and the island listens. Chapter 2. The First Shadows Over the Water. The weight of gathering wings. Morning settles across the French coast with a pale, washed-out light, the kind that makes everything look both familiar and foreign. You stand at the edge of a Luftwaffe airfield now, far from the quiet English beaches of the previous chapter. The earth feels different here, harder, sun-dried, stamped with the confidence of an army that has known only victory for nearly a year. Rows of aircraft rest nose to tail, like metal birds waiting for migration. Messerschmitt Bf 109s stand with their canopies open, cockpits exposed to the daybreak chill. Nearby, the heavier bombers, Heinkel He 111s, Dornier Du 17s, Junkers Ju 88s, sit in disciplined lines, their long wings casting thin shadows on the tarmac. And among them, scattered like markers in a sprawling equation, move the men who will fly them. You watch a pilot walk toward his aircraft, a young man, barely older than the British pilot from the Dawn airfield, though he carries his uniform with the crispness of someone who has been on the winning side of every campaign so far. His expression is calm, but beneath it lies something taut. Not arrogance, not excitement, something quieter, like the edge of a note held just a second too long. This side of the channel carries a different mood, less of listening, more of preparation. Ground crews tighten bolts, test radios, load ammunition belts with practiced efficiency. Officers gather around maps, tracing routes over the channel, through the haze of coastal defenses, toward airfields and radar stations that have been photographed from high altitudes. You sense a collective readiness, a force coiled not with fury, but with a precise, almost mathematical intent. And yet, beneath it all, a shadow of doubt flickers in a few minds. Britain is no longer just another country to overrun. It is an island that must be reached by air, an enemy that breathes through its machines and listens through its strange coastal towers. Even here, confidence is not absolute. Even here, some young men look up at the water and wonder. The radar's first whisper. Across that water, the English coast meets the day with its own muted rituals. Fog thins along the cliffs. Seagulls drift low over the waves. And somewhere inland, in a dim building filled with a low hum of electricity, a radar operator adjusts her headphones. You watch her sit in the glow of the screen, a WAF plotter named Margaret, or Joan, or Anne. The name doesn't matter. Her attention does. It is unwavering, narrow, attuned to the faintest irregularities. Her pencil rests just above the plotting sheet. Her eyes flick between the screen and the clock. Her breath stays shallow, as if exhaling too loudly might disrupt the weak signal stretching across the channel. Then it happens. A small pulse where there should be none. A faint, brief spike. Another. A suggestion more than a certainty. She leans closer. Marks a coordinate. Passes the information quietly along the chain. A controller in another room takes it. A group headquarters officer receives it seconds later. Sector stations begin to stir. The system doesn't roar. It unfolds with the gentle inevitability of ink spreading across paper. Counters move on a large map. Phones ring softly. A squadron leader is roused from his half-sleep. Mechanics step outside and glance at the sky, sensing the shift even before orders arrive. These first signals aren't dramatic. They are reconnaissance flights, probing the edges of British defenses, testing the rhythm of the radar stations, measuring response times. But to you, watching through this layered quiet, they feel momentous. The first shadows have crossed the water, and Britain has noticed. Scramble, but softly. On an RAF airfield not far from the coast, pilots sit in deck chairs outside the dispersal hut. They look relaxed, but the ease is fragile, resting on the thin margin between boredom and alarm. A bicycle leans against the wall. A mug of tea cools near someone's boot. A newspaper sits folded to a page with yesterday's casualty figures. Then the phone rings. Not urgently, just one clear, unwavering ring. A gunner looks up. A mechanic freezes mid-step. A pilot rests his finger on the handle of his mug. The dispersal officer listens for a moment, nods once, then walks briskly to the waiting men. Stand by to scramble. Not a shout. Not a dramatic unveiling. Just 4 words, spoken with the gravity of someone tightening a knot. The pilots move with soft speed, their bodies remembering what their minds have had to rehearse again and again. Mugs left half full. Newspapers fluttering shut. Chairs overturned in the grass. Engines cough awake. Props begin to spin. The smell of fuel thickens in the morning air. You watch as a hurricane rolls down the runway, lifts, and rises into the pale sky with a single smooth arc. The wheels tuck in like a bird folding its legs. Another follows. Then another. This isn't the great clash yet. These are the first dances, cautious, probing, learning. Up above, at the edge of the high cloud layer, a lone German reconnaissance plane turns away, having tested what it needed to test. The British fighters climb toward it, perhaps too late to intercept, perhaps right on time to force it home. Either way, something has changed. The silence of watching has turned into the rhythm of responding. You hear the calm voice of a controller through the radio crackle. Bandits at 15,000, heading east. Not angry, not afraid. Measured, as if guiding someone through fog. The RAF pilots tighten their formation slightly, scanning the sky with a calm born not from confidence but from necessity. The Luftwaffe plane disappears into haze. The RAF turns back. Both sides return to their airfields without loss. A small encounter, but monumental in its own way. For the first time since the fall of France, Britain has met Germany not as a fleeing army or a collapsing force, but as an opponent, alert and unbowed. Over villages and fields. The first shadows that cross the Channel do not fall only on airfields. They slip over fishermen's cottages, grazing pastures, chalk cliffs dotted with gulls. In a coastal village, an elderly woman hanging laundry pauses to look up at the faint glint of a distant aircraft. She cannot tell whose it is. The sound is thin, wavering, like a memory trying to form. In a nearby field, a farmer stands beside his tractor, listening. His animals sense the change before he does, a tension in their stillness, a subtle pause in their grazing. He wipes his hands on his trousers, looks toward the horizon, and waits. No sirens yet. No bombs. Just the beginning of awareness. A schoolteacher walking along a cliff path hears an unfamiliar engine note and stops mid-step. She shades her eyes, tracking the shape as it passes overhead. She has heard the radio broadcasts. She has read the news. But seeing the first hints of the coming storm makes it feel more real than any headline. You can imagine how many eyes lift to the sky in those early days. How many breaths pause. How many conversations falter. Britain is no longer listening only through its machines. Its people have become listeners too. The first small attacks. Probing flights soon turn into minor raids. A few bombers escorted by fighters. Quick strikes at coastal convoys. Short, testing runs against radar stations. Light attacks on ports and air bases. The damage is limited, almost tentative. But the psychological shift is unmistakable. On an RAF sector station, a controller marks the first confirmed raid of the day with a small counter on the table map. Her hand moves carefully, almost reverently. This, she knows, is the beginning. Outside, the siren rises, not the long, undulating wail of a full raid, but a shorter, sharper alert. Pilots jog to their aircraft. Ground crews scatter to their stations. The air thickens with noise, but the underlying rhythm remains calm, structured, almost ceremonial. In the sky, the Luftwaffe pilots release their bombs with precise, practiced motions. They are not aiming to break the island yet. They are probing it, measuring its reactions, learning its systems. Afterward, the bombers return to France, engines droning steadily. Some pilots exchange quiet glances. Others light cigarettes as soon as they climb down from their aircraft, trying not to let the thin trembling of their fingers show. Even victory feels different when the sea lies between you and your enemy. Distance adds uncertainty. Water adds risk. The sky becomes the only bridge. Britain takes its first breath back. As days pass, the British response sharpens. Scrambles become faster. Communication smoother. The web of radar, observers, and sector stations grows tighter, more precise. You stand again in a dim filter room at Fighter Command Headquarters, where women push counters with long rods across a vast table map. Their movements are graceful, almost balletic, a quiet choreography of war. Voices call out altitudes, bearings, Aircraft counts. Plotters echo the numbers. Telephonists relay them. Controllers issue calm, clipped orders. Nothing feels rushed, even though timing is everything. The system breathes like a living thing. You might not think of coordination as beautiful, but here, in the low light of this operations center, it has its own strange grace. A symmetry of minds. A harmony of effort. The first shadows over the water have met a country learning how to defend itself one breath at a time. The sky learns their names. In these early encounters, certain voices begin to stand out. Sailor Mallon's calm, authoritative presence in the air, guiding younger pilots with firm clarity. Douglas Bader's fierce determination, his legs gone but his spirit sharper than most. Polish pilots arriving with fire in their bellies and grief behind their eyes, their country ravaged, their families gone, their desire to fight sharpened to something nearly incandescent. But even here, the script avoids heroics. These men are not icons yet. They are simply voices on radio channels, silhouettes climbing into cockpits, shadows passing across the sky. They breathe. They sweat. They hope. They fear. You might wonder whether they feel the weight of history on their shoulders. They do not. They feel only the weight of the next mission. And that is enough. The channel holds its silence. By the end of this early phase, something subtle has shifted. The Luftwaffe has tested the defenses. Britain has answered. The channel lies between them like a held breath, a pause before escalation. Even the weather seems to wait. Winds soften. Clouds gather in loose, undecided formations. The sea darkens slightly, as though preparing for something heavier. You find yourself imagining the horizon not as a dividing line, but as a tightrope, thin, trembling, strung between two nations readying their strength. The first shadows over the water were small. The next will be larger. This is only the beginning. And still, in the slowness of these early days, you feel the calm that will soon be shattered, the hush between breaths, the stillness before a long and trembling storm. The island listens. The sky listens back. Chapter 3. The battle finds its rhythm. When the raids begin to gather shape. By early July, the sky no longer feels like an untouched canvas. It has texture now, faint strokes of exhaust, echoes of encounters, the residue of tension settling into the air itself. You stand once again on the English coast. The sea below you is calm, deceptively so, its surface reflecting a muted morning light. Yet you can sense something beneath that calm, a heaviness, as if the water knows what is coming long before the first wave of engines reaches the shore. Far across that thin line of blue, the Luftwaffe is assembling in earnest. This is no longer probing, no longer reconnaissance, no longer testing the edges of a country's nerves. Raids take shape in the early light like dark constellations, bombers forming in disciplined geometric patterns, fighters orbiting them in protective spirals. The aircraft glint briefly in the sun, then settle into the dull metallic color of war. From the airfields near Calais and the Pas-de-Calais region, engines rumble in steady waves. Ground crews step back and shield their faces from the heat. Officers watch with binoculars. A few young pilots crack their knuckles unconsciously. Others cross themselves, or adjust gloves, or look briefly at the sky as though trying to imagine what lies beyond the distant haze. Even on this side of the channel, you can almost feel the vibration of that many engines, their low growl traveling across the water like a hidden pulse. In the shift from reconnaissance to real offensive, the war in the air finds its shape, a rhythm that begins softly, then deepens, then sharpens until it is the only sound that seems to matter. You sense that Britain is about to be tested not in the abstract, but in the concrete lines of smoke, fire, and relentless pressure. The battle has stepped forward. The rhythm has begun. The Dowding system awakens fully. Deep inside the filter room at Bentley Priory, the morning begins before the sun has finished rising. Lights flick on. Plotters take their positions. Telephonists adjust their headsets. Staff officers flip through fresh sheets of data and weather reports. The Dowding system, invented by Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, now pulses with life like a vast mechanical heart. You watch the process unfold with quiet fascination. Radar stations detect echoes. Observer Corps posts confirm sightings with binoculars and sky-watching charts. The filter room assembles the incoming fragments into one coherent picture, a living map of the sky. Counters slide across the large table. WAAF plotters murmur bearings and altitudes. Controllers stand with arms folded, eyes scanning the evolving patterns. To someone outside the room, the noise might seem chaotic, but you hear it differently, as a slow, steady cadence, each element feeding into the next. A whisper becomes a signal becomes a plot becomes a raid becomes an order. Vector 2-3-0, climb to Angels 15. Squadron scramble. Stand by. The voices remain calm, even when the map fills with hostile formations. The calm is not an illusion. It is discipline. It is composure forged by necessity. The Dowding system turns fear into structure, into timing, into the measured breathing of an entire defensive machine. You can see why historians will later say that this system, this quiet, methodical process, was as vital as any aircraft. It allows Britain to fight with intelligence instead of chaos, with precision instead of panic. Outside, the world may shake. But inside these rooms, everything moves with quiet clarity. Scrambles become a daily ritual. On an RAF airfield in southern England, the morning hum has a new character. Gone is the slow drift of hours waiting for the first echo on the radar screen. Now, the air feels taut from the moment the pilots arrive, as though the day itself is leaning forward, anticipating the next scramble. Deck chairs still sit outside the dispersal hut, but no one relaxes in them for long. Mugs of tea are poured and left untouched. Newspapers are opened but never finished. Boots stay loosely tied, then tightened at the first ring of the dispersal phone. When the call comes, it is never dramatic, but it cuts through the air like the strike of a bell. Scramble! The pilots rise almost as one, not running wildly, but moving with swift, practiced purpose. You watch them jog toward their aircraft, helmets under their arms, parachutes slung across shoulders, faces half-shadowed by rising sun. Engines roar awake. Propellers slash the air. Fuel fumes mingle with morning mist. One hurricane lifts. Then another. Then a Spitfire arcs upward with a kind of grace that makes even war seem momentarily suspended in beauty. You feel the airfield exhale once they're gone, a collective breath held and released. Ground crews return to their tasks. Mechanics wipe oil from their hands. The dispersal hut door swings shut on its hinges. For those left on the ground, waiting becomes its own kind of battle. Birds scatter when the next scramble comes. Children watching from a nearby farm stop their games and look up. A dog barks, sensing tension before humans do. Scrambles now shape the rhythm of the day. Morning, midday, late afternoon, sometimes at dusk. The sky is becoming a place that must be defended again and again, sometimes every hour. And each time the gates open and the wheels leave the earth, A small, steady part of the island learns how to breathe in uncertainty. The first heavy engagements. Higher in the sky, the first major clashes of the Battle of Britain unfold not as a blur, but as something strangely slow, like watching storms build inside a vast cathedral of air. You drift upward now, through the cloud layers, through the bright emptiness where the blue grows deep and cold. Here, at 20,000 feet, the world shrinks to metal, breath, and horizon. The Luftwaffe formations approach in disciplined lines, bombers in tight groups, fighters weaving above them like guardians. RAF fighters slice upward to meet them. The first tracers sparkle faintly, like sparks from a distant forge. Then the engagements bloom. Contrails twist. Engines scream. Shadows fall and rise across the clouds. Yet the beauty remains, strange, haunting, unintentional. Even in violence, the sky holds a kind of reverence. A Spitfire arcs through sunlit vapor, trailing smoke that glows golden. A Messerschmitt dives past, its wings humming with a sharp, metallic pitch of speed. Bombers hold steady, their crews gripping controls with white knuckles, sweat slipping down their backs. You remain an observer, always watching, never inside the cockpit. You feel the vibrations, the shifts, the danger, but not the personal fear. The sky becomes a moving tapestry of lines, vertical, spiraling, crossing, dissolving. And through it all, radio voices continue with the same steady tone. Break left. Enemy diving. Stay with me. Returning to base. Some voices cut off mid-sentence. Others return shaking but intact. The engagements are fierce, but not yet decisive. Both sides learn. Both sides adapt. Both sides recalibrate the meaning of endurance. The sky, once empty, is now a place marked by intention. On the ground, the world tilts. As the air battles intensify, life below begins to warp around them. In a small Kent village, children walking to school pause whenever the droning of engines grows heavy overhead. They look up with a mixture of curiosity and fear, their lunches tucked under their arms, their hands stained with chalk from morning lessons. In coastal towns, fishermen check their nets while scanning the sky. Their boats rock gently in the water. Their eyes track the contrails drifting like faint scars across the blue. A farmer pauses his ploughing when he hears the first thud of distant explosions. His horse shifts nervously. Dust from the fields floats upward, catching the light in trembling columns. A mother in a seaside home watches smoke rising on the horizon. She doesn't know if it's from a burning aircraft or a targeted port. She turns down the radio slightly, not wanting her children to hear the broadcasted confirmation. Civilians become students of sky behavior, learning to recognize engine notes, patterns, altitudes. They cannot fight the battle, but they feel it tightening around them like an unspoken vow. Meanwhile, the first serious reports of losses filter through the RAF command system. Some pilots return pale and shaken, some limping, some not at all. And with every name missing from the next morning's roll call, the battle feels heavier. Yet the resolve deepens too. Even in quiet tears, even in late-night conversations whispered over teacups, there is a sense that the sky is worth defending, that endurance is a kind of quiet courage all its own. In German command rooms. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe's leadership watches the early results with a mix of confidence and frustration. Air fleets report successful raids, but not decisive ones. Bombers return damaged more often than expected. Fighter escorts complain of fuel limits over the Channel, and RAF resistance proves far more coordinated than anticipated. Inside a command room near the French coast, maps hang on walls marked with blue and red arrows. Officers trace routes with sticks, adjusting targets. Teleprinters chatter. Messengers move through the haze of cigarette smoke. Hermann Göring, resplendent in his ornate uniform, makes grand promises about Britain's impending collapse. Many officers nod. A few exchange quiet looks. The Luftwaffe has been powerful across the continent. But here, facing an island defended by radar, discipline, and steel, the rhythm feels different. Each raid becomes a question. Each return flight, an answer. Each bomber cruise report, a reminder that the Channel is not simply water. It is a thin, perilous boundary that turns every mile into risk. The battle's scale is increasing, but so is its complexity. By evening, smoke finds the horizon. As July deepens, the battle's rhythm stabilizes into something strangely predictable. Raids at dawn, raids at midday, raids at evening. Scrambles threaded between them like breaths. You stand now at a cliff top as the sun begins to lower, turning the edges of the clouds orange and soft. Smoke from the day's engagements drifts across the water, thin, curling shapes that dissolve slowly into the cooling air. The sea below reflects it faintly, as though absorbing the day's memory into its depths. A Spitfire returns low, limping home with one wing torn. Its engine sputters, coughs, catches again. A single gull follows it briefly, then veers off toward the shore. In the far distance, the vapor trails of the outgoing Luftwaffe formations fade into the dimming sky. It is quiet, almost peaceful, and yet that peace feels weighted, the calm between heartbeats, the stillness that comes not from tranquility, but from exhaustion. You watch the smoke drift until it thins into transparency, until the sky reclaims its color. Then, softly, evening settles. The battle has found its rhythm. Chapter 4. The Eagle Day Dawn. The morning the sky tightened. The morning of August 13th, 1940 begins with a softness that feels out of place. A warm, slow light settles across the English countryside, brushing the tops of hedgerows, drifting over fields of ripening grain, touching church towers still dark from the night. To anyone waking in a cottage, farm, or seaside home, it seems an ordinary summer morning, the kind meant for washing hung on lines, for bicycles rattling over dusty roads, for the kind of quiet that lasts until children spill into gardens. But you feel it differently. There is a tension in the air, subtle as a drawn breath. The clouds hang lower, thicker, as if waiting. The birds fall strangely silent in the hour just before dawn. Across the Channel, Luftwaffe airfields hum with activity, not the steady rhythm of the past weeks, but something more concentrated, more focused. Something rehearsed. Engines growl to life in long, vibrating lines. Mechanics step back from their work, hands still dark with oil. Officers stand at the edges of runways, binoculars raised. Pilots climb into cockpits with expressions that are not yet hardened but no longer soft. Today, the Luftwaffe means to strike a decisive blow. This is Adler Tag, Eagle Day, the opening note of a full-scale assault meant to break the RAF, cripple its airfields, and push Britain toward invasion. The sky is about to tighten. You can feel it in the stillness of the air, in the hush of distant waves, in the way the light seems to hesitate on the horizon as if uncertain whether to rise. Across the water, the first engines roll. In northern France, long rows of bombers stretch into the distance. Heinkels, Dorniers, Junkers. Their canopies glint in the early sun. Their wings vibrate as the throttles rise. Their shadows overlap in strange, geometric shapes along the concrete. You stand among the ground crews now, listening as crews receive last-minute instructions. Nothing about these briefings is loud. Orders are spoken in clipped, even tones. Pilots nod. Navigators unfold maps with steady hands. A few men glance across the runway at the channel beyond the haze, though they cannot see it. They can only feel its presence, like a challenge waiting in the distance. A young Luftwaffe pilot, no older than 21, runs his thumb across the edge of a photograph tucked behind a control lever. The face in the picture is blurred by sunlight. You cannot see who it belongs to. You only feel its weight. Engines roar louder. Propellers slash the air. The first bombers lift, heavy-bellied, climbing slowly into formation. They begin to assemble into precise patterns, dark swarms growing larger, circling like constellations being drawn into shape. Above them, fighters weave in protective arcs. Messerschmitt Bf 109s slice upward with confident speed, their engines sharp and taut, like wires strummed too tightly. This is not a probing raid. This is not reconnaissance. This is a full day of war. Eagle Day has begun. Radar sees what the eye cannot. The English coast receives the first echo not through sound, but through electricity. In a chain home station overlooking the sea, a young WAF operator listens to the hum of machinery beneath the floorboards. The radar screen glows faintly before her, a circle of light, thin lines trembling with static. At first, the echoes appear small, faint, uncertain, barely distinguishable from noise. Then the spikes strengthen. Multiple readings, aligned, growing. Her breath catches quietly. She leans in, pencil ready. Numbers, range, bearing, altitude. She passes them to the woman beside her, who repeats them calmly into a telephone headset. Down the chain they go, filter rooms, group headquarters, sector stations. Within minutes, the big table map at Uxbridge fills with markers that multiply like dark seeds. A controller steps forward. Raid strength increasing, more contacts forming off the French coast. The room doesn't panic. It moves. Plotters adjust counters. Telephonists relay updates. Officers mark new threats along chalked grids. The Dowding system breathes, expanding, tightening, coordinating. Someone wipes a bead of sweat from their temple, though the room is cool. Someone else adjusts the strap of their headset. No one raises their voice. Outside, church bells ring softly in a distant village. No one there knows what is forming over France. Not yet. But the radar does. And through it, Britain sees the storm before a single cloud darkens the sky. Scramble orders in 3 directions. On RAF airfields across southern England, the day begins with footsteps, with murmured conversation, with a clink of metal cups inside dispersal huts. A pilot sits on the edge of a wooden chair, helmet on his knee. He yawns lightly, rubs a hand across his face, then glances at the sky that has become a calendar, a clock, a warning. Another reads yesterday's paper without absorbing the words. A third tightens his bootlaces twice, even though they were already tight. Then the phone rings. Once. Sharp. Clear. The dispersal officer lifts it, listens, nods. He steps outside. Scramble. And the world shifts. Chairs fall. Boots pound the ground. Mechanics run alongside accelerating aircraft. Propellers ignite into spinning silver discs. Engines roar. Canvas maps slip from tables. Tea spills in forgotten mugs. Several squadrons launch almost simultaneously. Spitfires rising from one station, hurricanes from another, radios crackling with clipped orders that cut through the noise. Vector 180, Angels 12, intercept inbound raid. Tally-ho as able. A single Spitfire lifts into sunlight, wings gleaming, then banks sharply toward the south. Another follows. Then a third. Within minutes, the sky above England becomes a lattice of climbing arcs, contrails beginning to form like faint chalk strokes against blue canvas. The air is no longer waiting. It is responding. The first collision of the day. At 15,000 feet, the two forces meet. The Luftwaffe formations appear first as tiny glints, then as dark shapes, then as a mass, bombers clustered tight, fighters circling around them like hawks. The RAF fighters approach from below, from the sides, from the blind spots that experience has taught them. You hover at the edge of the formation, an observer suspended in the bright, trembling cold of high altitude. Voices spark through radios. Enemy in sight. Hold formation. Attack on my signal. Then a pause. Brief, sharp, decisive. Tally-ho. The sky erupts. Spitfires twist upward into spirals that catch the sun, making them glow for a split second like silver leaves. Hurricanes dive with heavier, darker force, their guns flashing in short, controlled bursts. Messerschmitts drop like falling blades, slicing down at impossible angles, engines screaming. Bombers tighten their formation, gunners firing into the empty air where a target might appear any second. Contrails curve. Smoke trails open like grey wounds in the sky. A bomber wing dips, then steadies. A Spitfire rolls inverted in a long, graceful arc, trailing light. For you, the observer, time seems to slow. Not out of drama, out of clarity. Each movement is distinct. Each engine note layered. Each decision made in less than a heartbeat. Yet the beauty remains. Terrible, accidental, undeniable. A Messerschmitt passes so close beneath you that you feel the heat of its engine wash. A hurricane climbs in a soft, determined curve, despite a smoking trail behind it. A bomber crew works in silence, their movements precise even as the aircraft shudders under fire. The sky is no longer a place of waiting. It is a battleground, enormous, bright, merciless. But through it all, the calm remains, not in the violence, but in the narration, in the distance that lets you drift through the chaos without being swallowed by it. Civilians hear the day unfold. On the ground, the sounds arrive as echoes. A woman opening her bakery in a village near Dover hears a distant rumble, too long, too sustained to be thunder. She pauses with her hands dusted in flour, glancing toward the sky. A farmer leading a horse across a field feels the animal stop abruptly. Its ears tilt upward. Its chest expands, tense. He looks up, shielding his eyes, and sees faint streaks drawing lines between clouds. Children in a garden stop their game and stand silent, looking toward the coast where a thin column of smoke begins to rise. None of them can see the full battle, but all of them feel its shadow. Somewhere inland, an air raid warden stands outside a shelter, ticking off names on a clipboard, listening to the distant percussion of bombs falling on an airfield. His pencil trembles slightly, though his face remains composed. A train conductor pauses before blowing his whistle, hearing the low hum of engines crossing overhead. He waits until the sound fades before signaling departure. In London, a clerk stepping out of an office building looks up to see a lone Spitfire flying low, smoke trailing from its tail. It banks slightly, trying to reach home. People stop and watch, breath held. War touches the island lightly at first, not with destruction, but with awareness. Command tension on both sides. At RAF Fighter Command, the pace is relentless. Reports pour in. Raids crossing at multiple points. Engagements over Kent. Losses on both sides. Airfields damaged. Squadrons rotating, rearming, refueling. Controllers speak with rapid accuracy. Plotters move counters without hesitation. Dowding watches in silence, one hand on the edge of the table map, his eyes steady despite the growing weight of the day. He does not shout. He rarely raises his voice. His calm steadiness holds the center of the entire defense. Across the channel, Goring grows agitated. Reports of losses. Bombers returning scarred. Fighters low on fuel. Targets not fully destroyed. He demands more pressure. Faster results. Decisive blows. But the channel, the weather, the distance, and the RAF all argue otherwise. The tension is no longer tactical. It is personal. Two systems facing each other, each with its limits, each testing the other's endurance. Evening gathers the remains. By late afternoon, the energy of Eagle Day begins to slow, not because the battle is resolved, but because human bodies and metal machines can only endure so much. Returning aircraft limp across the sky, RF fighters trailing smoke, Luftwaffe bombers missing panels, Messerschmitts gliding on fumes. Some pilots sit silently in their cockpits, eyes forward, faces pale. Others sag with exhaustion, hands trembling slightly as they taxi in. Ground crews run to greet survivors, glancing upward for those who are missing. On the English coast, wreckage drifts in on the tide. Fragments of wing, torn pieces of fuselage, small metallic shapes reflecting the last light of day. Smoke curls from distant airfields. Villagers gather outside pubs to read the latest notices. Children whisper in lowered voices, sensing the heaviness around their parents. Night falls slowly, gently, as if trying not to disturb what the day has left behind. The sky darkens. The engines stop. The last contrails fade into dusk. And somewhere, in that stretch of silence between the day's last breath and the night's first exhale, you feel the truth settle quietly. Eagle Day did not break Britain. It did not break the RAF. It did not open the door to invasion. It only opened the next chapter of endurance. The rhythm of the battle has deepened, and the long struggle for the sky has truly begun. Chapter 5. The Longest Month. August finds its teeth. August arrives without ceremony. No shift in the wind. No sudden break in the clouds. Just a slow tightening, a subtle deepening of the rhythm established in July. You stand in a quiet English lane at dawn, hedgerows heavy with summer leaves, the world washed in gold. The air hums faintly with insects, the road still damp from last night's dew. Nothing in this peaceful moment suggests the violence gathering far overhead. But August breathes differently. It carries heat that clings to the skin, haze that blurs the distance, and a tension that settles into conversations like dust. On the French coast, Luftwaffe commanders review their plans yet again. Eagle Day did not produce a collapse. Britain did not fold. The RAF did not break. And so the pressure increases. Raids become larger, more frequent, more coordinated. Airfields are struck not once but twice in the same day. Fighter squadrons are rotated until exhaustion becomes a second uniform. You sense the month stretching ahead, long, relentless, heavy with expectation. It will be the longest month of the battle, not because of a single decisive blow, but because of how many times Britain must rise to meet the same storm. Morning raids, afternoon raids, evening raids, night alarms. The days become loops of endurance. Airfields under endless pressure. You walk now along the perimeter track of an RAF airfield in the southeast, the earth beneath your feet baked by days of sun and engines. The grass lies flat where Hurricanes and Spitfires have repeatedly taxied, their tires carving temporary paths across the heat-hardened ground. At the far end, ground crews work with mechanical focus, loading ammunition belts, checking hydraulics, patching bullet holes with metal plates hammered into place, refueling from trucks that smell faintly of petrol and dust. Their movements are fast, precise, without wasted gesture. They sweat under the sun, sleeves rolled up, hands blackened. You notice something strange. Each time a fighter returns, no matter how damaged, they move toward it without hesitation, as if a silent pact binds them, that nothing will leave this field unready. Behind you, a squadron leader confers quietly with a controller. Squadron down to 9 serviceable aircraft. Relief arriving from Tangmere. Fuel reserves. Enough for 2 more sorties. The voices are calm, but the math is brutal. Every sortie costs energy, machines, and sometimes lives. Then the siren rises, not the long, wailing rise of a civilian warning, but a clipped airfield tone. Ground crews stop mid-motion. Pilots jog from the dispersal hut. Engines roar awake. The airfield becomes a drum, a heartbeat amplified by metal and speed. Hurricanes lift first, heavy and purposeful. Spitfires follow with cleaner lines, climbing faster. You watch as one takes off with a faint trail of smoke from its exhaust, its pilot barely visible beneath the canopy. The aircraft is tired. So is he. But both rise anyway. The pressure on the airfields is constant, an attempt to break the RAF not in one day, but by wearing the ground beneath it thin. August becomes the month of attrition, and the days stretch long and hot. Supply lines of courage. In the hangars, new engines arrive in wooden crates marked with dates and factory codes. Wings lie stacked like enormous leaves waiting to be joined to fuselages. Propeller blades curl against the walls with subtle variations in shape and sheen. Civilian factories, hundreds of miles away, operate day and night, their workers unaware of who will fly the machines built by their hands. A young woman in a Midlands factory rivets metal plates long past midnight, sweat dripping down her temple. She wipes it with the back of her hand and continues. She doesn't know her work will hold the wing of a hurricane through a dogfight 3 days later. A machinist in Bristol polishes the last bolt of a Merlin engine, whispering something under his breath. Habit, superstition, hope. A convoy driver moves along dark country roads with his cargo of aircraft parts, headlights dimmed, listening to the occasional thunder of distant engagements overhead. You watch these quiet supply lines stretch and connect, invisible threads that keep the RAF flying. War depends on courage in the sky, but it survives on endurance on the ground. The heat that warps the air. By mid-August, the weather amplifies everything. The heat rises early, shimmering above runways, making the air dance in distorted waves. Pilots climbing into cockpits feel the warmth radiate through the metal before the engine even starts. Inside the glass canopies, the temperature grows stifling. Breath fogs briefly. Sweat gathers. Leather gloves cling to the controls. At altitude, the heat drops sharply, from sweltering warmth on the ground to the icy bite of thin atmosphere within minutes. Pilots feel it in their bones, in the stiffness of their fingers, in the way their breath becomes shallow and dry. The contrast exhausts them. But the sky offers no mercy. Engagements erupt in bright, shimmering air, where heat, haze, and smoke blend into illusions. Aircraft appearing closer or farther than they are, shapes twisting unpredictably. Even the earth suffers. Fields around airfields scorch under incendiaries. Hangars bake under the sun. Tarmac cracks lightly in places. The heat becomes part of the battle, an unseen force shaping every movement. Patterns of attack and response. You move now through the rhythm of a single August day, absorbing its patterns like breaths. Morning. Raids on coastal convoys. Low-flying attacks that send plumes of water rising near ships. RAF fighters scramble, intercept, return. Ground crews rush to refuel. Midday. Large formations cross the channel. Bombers with fighter escorts. Airfields are struck again. Sector stations feel the pressure. Controllers call. Squadron scramble. Relief squadron airborne. Vector 080. The voices remain steady. Afternoon. Smoke rises from one airfield. Another runway is cratered. A hangar burns slowly, flames curling around metal frameworks. Pilots return exhausted, some silent, some shaking, some with a wild brightness in their eyes that fades only after hours of rest. Evening. The day ends not with quiet, but with distant explosions as the last raids withdraw over the channel. The patterns repeat, day after day, until the month feels like a single long inhale with no exhale. You sense how fatigue seeps into the smallest gestures. A pilot rubbing his temple before climbing into the cockpit. A mechanic blinking slowly as he tightens a bolt. A controller flexing stiff fingers over a radio set. Yet none of them falter. Not yet. Names that begin to matter. Within the RAF ranks, certain pilots begin to rise into quiet recognition. Douglas Bader, fierce in both skill and spirit, leads with boldness that borders on defiance. His artificial legs make his achievements almost unbelievable, but he treats them as trivial, something to be forgotten. Sailor Mallon, calm and authoritative, speaks little but commands much. His guidance steadies squadrons in the most chaotic engagements. Polish pilots, burning with grief and determination, enter the battle with a ferocity that surprises even seasoned British pilots. They fight not only for Britain, but for their homeland lost beneath occupation. Yet even these names remain grounded in humility. The war has no place for swagger, only for persistence. You hear their voices through radios, not speeches. You see their silhouettes climbing ladders into cockpits, not standing on podiums. You feel their presence in the air, not in headlines. In August, heroism is quiet. It looks like exhaustion endured rather than avoided. A civilian's summer of shadows. Life on the ground continues with a strange, fragile normality. In London, families eat breakfast to the sound of distant engines. In Kent, children run through orchards, pausing when they hear aircraft. In Sussex, farmers operate tractors with one eye on the sky. At night, people gather by wirelesses, listening to updates delivered in calm, measured voices. They step outside afterward, look upward, and see faint glow on the horizon where airfields or ports have been struck. In some towns, smoke lingers into the next morning. In others, nothing has happened at all, only whispers, rumors carried by road and rail. You watch as the public learns to read the war like weather, the direction of cloud cover, the drone of engines at altitude, the quality of light at dusk. The shadow of the battle stretches over the entire island, even where no bombs fall. The ledger of losses. Both sides suffer. Luftwaffe bombers return shot full of holes, engines sputtering, crews pale from oxygen deprivation. Messerschmitt pilots sit on the edges of their bunks, staring at the floor, hands trembling. RAF pilots return with shattered canopies, damaged wings, bullet-riddled tails. Some stagger from their aircraft. Some limp. Some sit beside the runway, helmets still on, unable to speak. Controllers receive casualty lists. Commanders note losses in ledgers. Mechanics find blood on cockpits they must clean before the next sortie. You sense the price of each day, not in numbers, but in the weight people carry in their eyes. The battle becomes personal long before it becomes historical. Dusk finally arrives. By the end of August, the days feel longer than they should. You stand now on a hill overlooking the channel, the sky cooling into lavender and rose. Contrails from the afternoon's engagements drift slowly apart like dissolving chalk marks. A single Spitfire limps home low over the water, its engine coughing, its shadow stretched thin across the waves. A faint plume of smoke rises from somewhere inland. A fishing boat rocks gently near the shore, its lantern swinging in the breeze. A woman closes her shutters for the night, pausing to look toward the horizon. The long month exhales. Not in relief, in endurance. The sky grows dark. The war quiets, but does not sleep. August has not broken the RAF, nor Britain, nor the Luftwaffe. It has only deepened the struggle, stretching it like tired muscle, forcing both sides to discover reserves of strength they did not know they possessed. You watch the last traces of smoke fade into dusk. The horizon dims. The sea sighs. The island settles into weary silence. The longest month is ending, but the hardest weeks are still to come. When September opens its hands. September arrives not with thunder, but with a strange stillness, a pause in the rhythm of summer, a quieting of insects, a soft cooling of the air. You stand at the edge of an English orchard at dawn, the apples swollen and heavy on the branches, dew shimmering on the grass. The world looks peaceful, even generous. But that peace is fragile, like a thin shell stretched over something deeper, darker, waiting. The hardest weeks of the battle are beginning. August has exhausted both sides. Machines are tired. Men are tired. Even the sky seems tired, its blue fading to a more muted shade. But the Luftwaffe, shifting strategy, pushes harder. New orders echo through German command rooms. Strike harder. Strike deeper. Strike until the RAF bends. Raids intensify. Bomb loads increase. Fighter escorts adjust their patterns. Commanders argue, then commit. Across the channel, RAF pilots wake before dawn with a heaviness in their limbs, the air around them tasting faintly of fuel from the previous day's sorties. The war has begun to feel not like a series of battles, but like a weight, one that presses on the shoulders of everyone who touches it. September opens its hands, and inside them lies a storm. When airfields become targets. In the first days of September, the Luftwaffe shifts its aim from coastal attacks to the very heart of fighter command. Airfields, sector stations, the nerve centers that keep the RAF alive. You walk now along the perimeter of Biggin Hill, one of the busiest stations in the southeast. The ground here is scarred, craters in the turf, singed patches where fires were recently extinguished, the faint smell of smoke clinging to broken glass. Hangars stand with gaping holes in their roofs. Windows lie shattered in long glittering arcs. Workshops hum with frantic repair efforts. But despite the damage, The field is alive. Mechanics move with hurried precision. Aircrew walk quickly, helmets under their arms. Office staff sift through charred paperwork, salvaging what they can. A controller steps out of a building that no longer has an entire sidewall. He brushes dust from his uniform as if it were nothing more than morning dew. A WAF plotter picks up a fallen bicycle from the grass, rights it, and rushes to her next shift. Her hair is coated in powdered plaster from a blast earlier in the day. Not far away, a young pilot kneels beside a broken section of runway, running his fingers over the razor-sharp concrete shards, as if to understand how close he came to not surviving the last landing. The Luftwaffe's intent is clear. Cripple fighter command's ability to function. Break the stations that guide the squadrons. Shatter the system. But the system bends. It does not collapse. Airfields shift operations to other sites. Controllers relocate to backup rooms. Squadrons disperse further. Repairs begin within minutes of each raid. You see something remarkable in this chaos. Endurance as instinct. The strain on the pilots. By the second week of September, RAF pilots begin to show the true cost of continuous combat. You watch a pilot walk toward his Spitfire, and something about his posture tells the story before he speaks. His shoulders slope slightly. His gait is uneven, as though one knee has stiffened from too many hard landings. His eyes carry a quiet distance, a far-off focus that lingers even when someone speaks to him. He climbs into the cockpit the way a tired man might climb into bed, not with eagerness, but with acceptance. Inside the dispersal hut, another pilot lights a cigarette with trembling fingers. He inhales deeply, exhales slowly, then looks at the clock without meaning to. He knows the next scramble is minutes away. A third pilot sits on a wooden bench, elbows on knees, staring at the ground. He's lost a wingman 2 days ago. He hasn't yet spoken about it. No one asks. Fatigue becomes its own weather pattern, subtle, pervasive, unavoidable. Some pilots fly 6 sorties in a single day. Some fly back-to-back engagements without touching the ground for more than a few minutes. Some land with fuel nearly gone, ammunition spent, nerves stretched to their limits. And yet, when the phone rings, they rise. They always rise. You might wonder what holds them together. Discipline, duty, habit, or simply the knowledge that if they don't go up, the next raid will come unopposed. The truth is all of these, and something quieter, a shared resolve that cannot be taught, only lived. The Polish squadrons take flight. Among the most striking stories of these hardest weeks is that of the Polish pilots, especially the men of No. 303 Squadron. They have waited for months, grounded by language barriers and initial British skepticism. Now, they finally take to the sky. Their flying is fierce, sharp, fearless. British controllers struggle at first to understand their radio calls, the words rushing out with urgency and raw emotion. But their skill is unmistakable. You watch them rise from Narrated, engines screaming, as though released from long captivity. Their formations are tight. Their maneuvers aggressive. Their accuracy shocking even seasoned RAF veterans. In the heat of battle, a Polish pilot tears through a German formation with lightning precision, turning in angles British pilots rarely attempt. Another fires a measured burst that sends a bomber spiraling downward, smoke trailing like a dark ribbon. And when they land, breathless, exhilarated, their relief is momentary, followed by a quiet, deeper grief for a homeland they cannot return to. Their courage changes the battle's rhythm. Their presence becomes a force multiplier. Their determination inspires the squadrons around them. Even the tired pilots feel something shift. A spark, a reminder, a companion in endurance. London begins to tremble. Though the full blitz has not yet begun, London feels the tremors. In early September, a misdirected raid hits the city. Bombs fall in unexpected places. Glass shatters across neighborhoods. People emerge into the streets, confused, shaken. You walk now through a London street at dusk. The lamps glow faintly, the air smells of soot, and the tension is palpable. A young mother sweeps broken glass from her doorstep. Her child clings to her skirt, eyes wide, trying to understand why the sky felt angry. A shopkeeper boards up his windows while listening to distant airplanes. He tells a passerby, "It wasn't supposed to happen here," but he says it quietly, as if afraid the sky might answer. In a small cafe, patrons sip tea with hands that tremble slightly. Their conversation trails off whenever an aircraft engine passes overhead. The city is not yet a battlefield, but it is becoming aware. September is the month where civilians begin to feel the war not just as news, but as presence. Luftwaffe fatigue and frustration. Across the Channel, the German effort strains under its own weight. Fighter pilots fly long missions over the sea, fuel limits always tightening like a noose. Bomber crews grow weary of evasive maneuvers through swarms of British fighters. Commanders argue over tactics. Goring grows increasingly impatient. Losses mount. Morale dips. Accuracy suffers. Weather conditions fluctuate unpredictably. You stand in a Luftwaffe operations room where cigarette smoke hangs low. Men speak in short, clipped tones. Maps are updated constantly. Frustration simmers beneath polite formality. They expected Britain to crack. Instead, they encounter resistance that feels like a wall, invisible but unyielding. And that wall is made not of aircraft or guns alone, but of coordination, geography, endurance, and will. The hardest weeks weigh on both sides. But for the Luftwaffe, doubt begins to whisper. The Dowding system under strain. Back in Britain, the Dowding system stretches to its limits. Plotters grow hoarse from hours of continuous updates. Controller voices lose their crispness. Telephone switchboards glow red with constant relay traffic. Sector stations operate in damaged buildings, sometimes in half-collapsed rooms. Yet the structure holds. Counters move on the map. Orders flow. Squadrons rise. You notice something else, something subtle. The silence between commands. Even at peak pressure, controllers maintain a tone of calm, as if offering stability by example. Squadron, stand by. Scramble. Vector 150 at Angels 14. Steady. Measured. Unbroken. This discipline becomes the backbone of survival. A single day's wait. To understand these weeks, imagine a single day. Dawn. A raid crosses the coast. Squadrons intercept. A hurricane returns with smoke pouring from its engine. Late morning. Another raid forms. One pilot crash lands in a field. Farmers and home guard rush to help. Midday. Lunch is interrupted by the siren. Pilots eat sandwiches in the cockpit. Ground crews plunge into their tasks with sore muscles and blurred vision. Afternoon. Bombs fall on a sector station. Debris scatters across the runway. Operations shift underground. Evening. A returning Spitfire limps home with holes the size of fists in its wings. Another does not return at all. Night. Pilots collapse into bed, boots still on. Mechanics work under lantern light until their hands cramp. A WAF plotter falls asleep beside a map table during a quiet moment between raids. This is just one day. The next will be the same. And the next. And the next. The hardest weeks are not defined by a single event, but by repetition. Endurance becomes the battle, breath by breath. Night falls on an unfinished sky. You return now to the orchard where the chapter began, the apples still hanging heavy, the air cooling into evening. Distant engines fade. The last contrails dissolve into dusk. Smoke on the horizon thins until it becomes part of the twilight. An RAF pilot sits on the grass beside the dispersal hut, helmet beside him, head tilted back as he watches the first stars appear. His breath rises in slow, quiet clouds. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Inside a Luftwaffe mess hall across the channel, a bomber crew eats in silence, shoulders slumped, staring at plates they barely touch. In London, a child asks his mother why the sky makes such loud noises. She pulls him close and whispers something comforting, though she looks out the window with worry. Everywhere, the sky feels larger, stretched thin by the weight of these hardest weeks. Night gathers itself gently. Wind stirs through the trees. Lanterns glow in scattered cottages. The sea sighs against the shore. The war has entered its darkest passage. And yet, something fragile, stubborn, and unmistakably human remains. The willingness to stand another day. The hardest weeks are not over, but the island is still breathing, and the sky, though scarred, still holds its breath for what comes next. Chapter 7. The sky turns toward London. A change in the wind. Early September widens into something new, not through orders shouted in command rooms, not through sudden shifts on the map, but through a thin, invisible change. A wind turning, a mood darkening, a long-held breath finally exhaled. You stand in a quiet London street in the late afternoon. Children chalk pictures on the pavement. Laundry sways from windows. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and river water. Nothing suggests that the city is about to enter its darkest hours. But something subtle warns you. The birds flying lower. The way conversations pause when distant engines hum. The tension that curls along rooftops like gathering mist. Across the channel, something else is shifting. Goring, furious at missed objectives and mounting losses, approves a new plan. One that turns German attention away from airfields and toward the very soul of Britain, its cities. The first misdirected raid on London has already happened. Now the Luftwaffe prepares to make it deliberate. The hardest weeks of battle begin to reshape into something broader, deeper, more devastating. The sky is turning toward London. The decision to strike the heart. Inside a Luftwaffe command room in France, maps of southern England hang pinned to the walls, arrows marking previous attacks, circles indicating fighter ranges, notations scribbled in pencil. The shift in strategy is both emotional and tactical, a mixture of Göring's pride, Hitler's desire for retaliation after RAF strikes on Berlin, and a belief that breaking London's spirit might break Britain's will. Officers gather around the map. Some nod in approval. Others exchange uncertain glances. They know London is vast, dense, difficult to strike decisively. Its docks, factories, and railway lines sprawl outward like veins. But the order stands. Strike the capital. Strike it hard. Strike it until the island bends. Outside, bomber crews prepare for the new targets. Navigators memorize the angles of the Thames. Pilots study silhouettes of London landmarks. Gunners check their weapons with quiet resignation. You feel the tension hanging over them. Not triumph, not anticipation, but the heaviness that comes when a war expands into new territory. The sky above France waits. So does the sky above Britain. Soon, they will meet in a new kind of darkness. First shadows over the city. On the evening of September 7th, London receives its first deliberate blow. You're standing now on the banks of the Thames, the river moving slowly under the bridges, the water catching slivers of dying light. Workers from the docks move along the shoreline, wiping sweat from their necks, the day's labor etched into their gait. Then the sound arrives, a deep, rolling hum that does not belong to civilian life. Heads turn, conversations falter, children point upward. In the sky, shapes gather, small at first, then larger, like a distant flock of birds made of metal and intent. People squint into the late afternoon glare, and then realization falls, like the shadow of a cloud sweeping suddenly across a field. The sirens begin, long, rising cries that stretch across the city, echoing through alleys, bouncing off stone walls, reverberating along the river. The first bombs fall on the docks, huge, concussive blasts that send geysers of water into the air, shattering windows half a mile away. You step back as smoke rises behind warehouses, thick and black, rolling across the river like a dark tide. Civilians scatter. Some run for shelters. Others stand frozen, unable to comprehend the scale of what is beginning. London has entered the war, and the war has found its echo. The RAF rises in a race against time. Far from the city, at airfields scattered across the countryside, scramble orders go out as the first explosions bloom over London. Pilots sprint from dispersal huts, boots hammering across grass, the sun burning low along the horizon. Engines roar awake. Propellers become shimmering discs. The ground vibrates under the force of takeoff. Spitfires lift first, sleek, bright, cutting upward through the thickening haze. Hurricanes follow, their silhouettes heavier, darker, dependable. You rise with them, through layers of smoke, past drifting clouds tinged with orange, into a sky that feels suddenly crowded. Above London, the scene is staggering. Bombers in tight waves, Messerschmitts weaving defensive arcs, anti-aircraft bursts peppering the sky with black blossoms. The RAF plunges into the combat. Radio calls crackle through the haze. Bandits above the river. Break! Break! Tally-ho! Below, the city glows with fire. Patches of orange crawling along rooftops, reflections flickering in the river, smoke rising into the lungs of the night. Yet the RAF does not retreat. They fight through the smoke, through the glare of burning docks, through the exhaustion of weeks without rest. You watch one pilot climb sharply, his Spitfire nearly vertical, sunlight glancing off the glass canopy, as he chases a bomber through swelling clouds. Below, Another pilot shouts into the radio, his voice taut but calm. He dives, firing short bursts, then returns upward in a long, swooping arc. Even as London burns, the sky refuses to surrender. Civilians in the glow of dusk. On the streets below, the world transforms. You move through a neighborhood near the railway arches, where people huddle inside shelters, hands clasped, eyes wide. A father sits with two children pressed against his sides. He whispers stories between blasts, trying to keep their focus on the rhythm of his voice, not the thunder outside. A fireman jogs through the smoke, helmet reflecting flames, shouting instructions to colleagues. A woman kneels beside a fallen window frame, gathering shards quietly, as if cleaning might anchor her in some kind of normalcy. Farther east, along the docks, warehouse rooftops burn in long, sweeping lines. Boats blaze along the river. Cranes stand silhouetted like broken monuments. Above them, the bombers pass in waves, dark shapes against the burning sky, their engines blending into a single, undulating drone. You feel the weight of the moment. How suddenly war has become intimate, not distant lines on a map. London is learning what it means to be part of the battlefield. A city that refuses to break. Despite the devastation, something remarkable emerges almost immediately. Fire brigades rush into the flames. Rescue workers dig through debris. Neighbors check on one another. Churches open their doors. Shelters become small communities of shared breath. You see a baker handing bread to people outside his damaged shop. You see a bus driver offering rides through smoke-thick streets. You see a nurse carrying a stretcher with quiet determination. London bends, but does not break. A young woman stands in the doorway of her shattered flat, hands on her hips, hair blown wild by the gusts of descending fire, and mutters under her breath, "Well, if they think this'll stop us." And she finishes the sentence with a small, defiant shrug. A city discovers itself in crisis, not through triumph, not through speeches, but through steady, unglamorous resilience. The pilots who fight until dusk. As the raid continues, you rise again into the sky, where the light is fading, and the horizon turns the color of bruised peaches, soft purple, muted gold, dying fire. RAF pilots fight until visibility dwindles. One pilot wipes sweat from his brow, his hands trembling on the controls. He dives through smoke to break a bomber's formation, then climbs with a sharp exhale that barely reaches his own ears. Another circles above the river, his engine sputtering, his eyes stinging from smoke leaking through the canopy. A third glances at fuel levels, almost gone, but stays aloft until his squadron leader calls him home. The city glows beneath them, not with celebration, but with fire. London burning, the Thames reflecting orange flashes, smoke drifting like ink rising through water. Yet even here, in this exhausted twilight, the RAF refuses to yield. The city breathes because the pilots do, and the pilots breathe because they must. Not heroically, not dramatically, just steadily, the way endurance is meant to sound. After the raid, only silence speaks. When the last bombers withdraw across the Channel, A profound silence spreads across London. Not calm, not peace, but absence. The engines fade. The sirens fall quiet. The sky darkens fully. You walk through the city now. The streets silvered by moonlight filtered through smoke. Fire hoses lie across cobblestones. Ash drifts like slow snow. Burned timbers creak softly in the cooling air. People emerge cautiously, faces pale, eyes reflecting firelight, bodies moving with mechanical slowness. Some cry, some clean, some embrace, some simply stand still, trying to understand what the night has taken, and what it has left. Above them, the sky looks empty, as if exhausted by its own violence. But this emptiness is temporary. Tomorrow will come, and with it, another raid. London will not sleep long, nor will the pilots, nor will the radar operators, the firefighters, the mothers holding children tightly in railway tunnels. Endurance has entered a new chapter. The night leaves its mark. By dawn, the fires have not yet died. The smoke rises in slow spirals. The city smells of burning timber and damp stone. You stand on a bridge over the Thames, watching the glow fade from the river's surface. A barge drifts by slowly, its silhouette ghost-like in the first grey light. A lone Spitfire returns across the city, circling overhead before heading to its distant airfield. Its engine sounds tired, its shadow faint on the river. People walk through the streets with dusty shoes, and grey smudges across their cheeks. A boy sketches the silhouette of a bomber in chalk on the pavement. A fireman drinks tea from a dented tin cup, steam curling briefly into the morning air. The first deliberate strike on London has ended, but it has not accomplished what the Luftwaffe intended. It has not broken the RAF. It has not shattered British resolve. It has not opened the door to invasion. Instead, it has revealed something unexpected. The city will burn, but it will not bow. The sky has turned toward London, and London, battered and breathless, has turned toward the dawn, still standing. A city learns to sleep in darkness. By mid-September, London has changed, not in its streets or buildings, those still stand, though many bear new scars, but in its rhythm. The city now breathes in two worlds, the daylight world of work, dust, and river bustle, and the nighttime world of fear, shelter, and flickering firelight. You stand beneath a railway arch as dusk begins to gather. The trains above rumble softly, scattering fine dust down onto the pavement. People move with quiet purpose, some carrying blankets, others pushing prams with children already half asleep inside, their faces smudged with soot, but softened by weariness. London is preparing for the night the way a ship prepares for a storm, with routine, resignation, and an odd sense of ritual. Lamplighters no longer light their lamps. They move instead through the streets, making sure they are covered. Windows are taped. Doors are darkened. Shops extinguish every visible spark. When the last traces of sunlight fade, the city sinks into a darkness so complete, you can barely see your own hand, and in that darkness, you feel a strange thing. London is learning how to sleep inside the war, not peacefully, not deeply, but with a kind of practiced surrender to the inevitable. Above, the sky thickens. The night war is beginning. The Luftwaffe turns to the moon. Across the Channel, in airfields stretching from Calais to Brussels, crews prepare for another night, not of daylight precision, but of nocturnal persistence. The Luftwaffe has shifted its strategy again. The day raids continue, but now the nights are filling with purpose. Night bombing, continuous pressure, a rhythm meant to exhaust the island into submission. Inside one bomber, a navigator folds a map along creased lines. Moonlight slips through the cockpit's glass, illuminating his fingers. He traces the route with blunt pencil marks, down the French coast, across the Channel, straight toward the glow that still rises from London. The pilot stares ahead, eyes reflecting the faint silver of the horizon. He is young, but his hands are steady. War has already aged him in ways the mirror does not yet show. Ground crews slap the sides of the bombers as they begin taxiing. Engines roar, propellers blur into spinning halos, and the aircraft lift into the night like dark birds, seeking a distant coastline. You feel the air harden around them. The night becomes a corridor through which they fly, knowing only that something will be waiting on the other side. Searchlights, fire, bombs, or silence. Sirens as London's second clock. The first siren of the evening begins low, a distant hum, a trembling along rooftops, a warning carried by the wind. Then it rises, long and wavering, filling streets, tunnels, riverbanks, and rooftops, with a cry that feels almost alive. You walk through a narrow street as doors slam shut. People hurry underground, and shopkeepers usher neighbors into back rooms. A policeman on a bicycle rings his bell, not for traffic, but to alert stragglers to take cover. His silhouette moves through shadow, like something carved from the night itself. In a church crypt converted into a shelter, families gather with blankets and lanterns. Someone hums softly to a child. A man with thick, soot-stained hands pours tea from a dented flask. The air smells faintly of earth and candle wax. The sirens become London's second clock. Their cry marks the beginning of another night of endurance. Above, the engines approach. Searchlights draw their pale geometry. The first bombers reach London's outskirts. You hover above the city now, the river winding below like a dark ribbon, glinting occasionally in the moonlight. Then the searchlights ignite. Thin beams of white shoot upward, slicing the blackness into shifting patterns. Lines, triangles, quadrants, a geometry drawn not by mathematicians, but by exhausted crews in distant control rooms, turning wheels and levers with aching hands. The lights sweep the sky in long arcs. The beams catch smoke, dust, and occasionally a bomber's metal skin. The moment a bomber is illuminated, the whole sky seems to inhale. Anti-aircraft guns fire from rooftops and riverbanks, their flashes blooming like fierce white flowers. Around the trapped aircraft, inside the bomber, the crew flinches as the cabin floods with pale light. The pilot veers sharply, eyes straining, sweat sliding down his spine. The night war is not elegant. It is frantic, chaotic, blinding, and strangely beautiful. Searchlights bend and sway, painting the sky with trembling lines that resemble the bars of an enormous, shifting cage. But no cage holds the night for long. The bombers press on. Fire replaces sunlight. When the bombs begin to fall, they sound like sudden punctuation marks. Sharp, violent, unmistakable. You move through a district along the river. As explosions ripple across warehouses and docks, the sky glows orange. Brick walls shudder. Glass rains down like brittle confetti. The ground trembles with the impact. Fire engines race down narrow streets, bells clanging, hoses uncoiled in long serpents behind them. Firefighters move with a precision born of desperation. Helmets gleaming, faces streaked with soot, voices nearly swallowed by the roar of flames. A woman stands in the doorway of her darkened home, watching her street burn in slow, terrible motion. She grips the frame not to hold herself steady, but to keep from running into the fire for someone she loves, but knows she cannot reach right now. Smoke rises in thick columns. Sparks drift like desperate ash fireflies. The night turns the color of molten amber, reflected in the slow-moving river. Fire replaces sunlight, and in doing so, adds a new chapter to the battle's story. Underground, the city breathes together. In the deep tunnels of the London Underground, Londoners become a single community. You step into a station platform lit by dim bulbs, and see hundreds of people sitting shoulder to shoulder, along the edge of the tracks. Blankets hang from railings. Makeshift beds line the walls. A man plays a harmonica softly to calm the children. Near the escalator, someone pours warm tea into rows of chipped cups. People speak in low tones, as if loud conversation might tug the bombs downward. A woman knits in silence, her needles clicking softly like a heartbeat. A group of teenagers plays cards on a flattened cardboard box. A small dog curls beside an old man's feet, trembling with each distant impact. This underground world feels strangely tender, not safe, exactly, but held. London breathes here, together, through dust and fear, through damp stone and flickering bulbs, through the slow passing of hours, measured only by silence, and the next distant explosion. The RAF in the night sky. Though the Luftwaffe dominates the night, the RAF does not disappear. Night fighters rise. Blenheims at first, later bow fighters, their engines thundering into the darkness, with a sense of purpose more than precision. Navigators lean over glowing instruments, trying to find shapes hidden in the black, while pilots strain their eyes for fleeting silhouettes. The night sky becomes a world without horizon, without depth, without clear direction. A Blenheim passes beneath you, its exhaust briefly outlining wings in orange halos. Its crew scans the darkness for any movement that doesn't belong. They rarely find it, but they try. They try because someone must, because the city burns below, because the night must not belong to one side alone. The night finally steps back. When the final wave of bombers withdraws, the night feels strangely hollow. The engines fade. The anti-aircraft guns fall silent. The searchlights flicker out, one by one, until the sky becomes starless again. You walk through a street still warm from the fires. Ash drifts like slow grey snow. A lamp-post leans at an angle, twisted metal curled at its base. A rescue worker kneels beside a collapsed wall. hands trembling as he lifts debris stone by stone. He pauses only long enough to wipe his face with a sleeve smeared in soot. A boy picks through rubble looking for a toy. He finds it. He brushes the ash off. He smiles faintly. There are tears too. Quiet ones. Shared ones. Ones hidden in the shadows so children don't see. The night leaves its mark, not only in destruction, but in the faces of those who survived it. Dawn finds a city still standing. At sunrise, you return to the riverbank. The water glows pink beneath the smoke. Birds begin to sing, softly, hesitantly, as if unsure the sky is safe again. Fire crews rest on curbsides, helmets on the ground beside them. A nurse steps out of a makeshift clinic and exhales a cloud of breath, tinged with exhaustion. London has survived the night. It will face many more. But this first chapter of the Night War proves something. The Luftwaffe did not intend to teach. The city can burn and still wake up. The Battle of Britain has entered darkness. But the darkness has not swallowed the island. Not tonight. Not yet. The Night War unfolds. And the dawn, trembling but steady, arrives anyway. Chapter 9. The Day the Sky Refused to Break. A familiar morning, with something hidden inside it. The morning of September 15th does not arrive with trumpets. It comes the way so many mornings have come before it during this long summer of war, with pale light drifting over fields, with mist gathering in low hollows, with the soft clatter of milk carts along village lanes. You stand on a small hill overlooking the patchwork of countryside that stretches toward London. The air is cool. The first leaves on some trees are beginning to hint at yellow. Autumn is close, but not quite here. To anyone not watching closely, this could be any morning in the Battle of Britain. But you feel something different beneath the quiet, a subtle tightening, a sense that the days of testing and wearing down have gathered into a single point, across the Channel, in bases where bombers and fighters have risen day after day. The Luftwaffe prepares another massive effort. In London, people button coats, check the sky, fold newspapers with headlines that speak of raids, losses, courage and strain. On RAF airfields scattered across the south, pilots drink tea that has gone lukewarm. Mechanics finish last-minute repairs. Controllers scan operations boards crowded with pins and chalk marks. No one knows for certain that this day will be remembered differently from the others. But the sky does. You can sense it in the stillness before the first engine stirs. The big raids form over France. On the other side of the Channel, the early light glints off wings lined up in long, disciplined rows. Bombers rumble down runways in heavily loaded groups. Heinkels, Dorniers, Junkers. Fighters climb to escort them. Messerschmitt Bf 109s slicing upward. Bf 110s circling like heavy, uncertain guardians. You hover above the formations as they assemble into vast, organized shapes. From a distance, they look almost abstract. Clusters of wings moving in slow, coordinated arcs, like migrating birds made of rivets, fuel, and orders. Inside one bomber, a radio operator adjusts his headset, trying not to look at the small talisman hanging from a switch. A charm from home, from another life. In a fighter above, a pilot checks his fuel gauge. calculating in quiet, practiced mouth how long he can afford to linger over England before the Channel becomes an impossible distance. Orders echo through the airwaves. Routes are confirmed. Targets are named. London again. The heart again. The will of the island again. Engines roar louder. The formations turn north and west. From the French coast, they look like bands of shadow stretching out over the water. The Luftwaffe believes that if it pushes hard enough today, something may finally crack. The radar picture fills and fills. Back in Britain, the first sign of what is coming does not arrive in the sky, but on a glowing tube in a dim room. In a chain home station, a WAF operator leans closer to her screen. She has watched flickers for weeks now, turning them into bearings and heights, and urgent calls down the line. Today, the flickers grow faster. Blips multiply at the edge of the trace. Spikes rise where there was emptiness a moment before. The line becomes crowded. She calls out numbers, voice steady, pencil moving quickly. The filter room at headquarters receives them. Counters begin to march inland across a map. Voices pass the news to group and sector stations. Multiple raids forming. Large. Crossing soon. In the underground operations room, lights glow on wall charts. Controllers step closer to the table map. WAF plotters move markers in swift, purposeful sweeps. The pattern is clearer now. This is not scattered, testing pressure. This is a concentrated push. You watch the map grow crowded. Arcs of red counters crossing the channel. Lines of blue moving to intercept. The battle's entire shape briefly visible. In wood, cardboard, and chalk. The Dowding system, stretched but unbroken by August and early September, tightens once more. The island sees the storm coming, and it decides to stand. When scramble becomes a chorus. On multiple airfields now, the same sound echoes in quick succession. The ring of the dispersal phone. At one station, a pilot dozing in a deck chair jerks awake, the newspaper sliding from his chest to the floor. At another, a man mid-conversation stops his sentence halfway, eyes turning toward the hut. The dispersal officers listen briefly, nod once, and step outside with the same word on their lips. Scramble. The word ripples through squadron after squadron. Chairs topple. Mugs are abandoned on tables. Boots pound along the grass. Leather helmets are grabbed. Straps pulled tight in motion. Engines cough, then roar. Propellers flash into spinning transparency. The air around the field vibrates. Spitfires surge forward, lifting into the sky with the agility that has made them both beloved and deadly. Hurricanes follow, sturdy and reliable, heavy with ammunition and fuel. You rise with them, caught in the slipstream of their climb, watching the ground fall away. Airfield, counties, rivers, all shrinking into a patchwork of green and brown. Radios crackle. Control, this is Red Section Airborne. Climbing to Angels 20. Vector, please. The responses come back calm. Turn to 090. Large raid approaching London. Good luck, boys. No one says anything more dramatic. The ritual is enough. The sky is filling with fighters, not just from one station, but from many. all called into motion by the same converging storm. The sky above the city. At altitude, you see London spread out beneath you, a grey-brown sprawl threaded by the silver curve of the Thames, chimneys like stubble, railways like faint pencil lines. Above it, the bombers arrive in waves. The first formations push inland, fighters circling over them, the late morning light flashing along their wings. From this height, you can see the full scale of the engagement, in a way no pilot or civilian can. RAF fighters climbing, Luftwaffe fighters accelerating to meet them, bombers pressing on, heavy and determined. Radio calls flicker through the air. Bandits 12 o'clock high. Stay tight. Watch your tail. Attacking now. The collision is sudden, but not chaotic. Spitfires dart through the fighter screens, seeking the bombers. Hurricanes dive on the formations, guns flashing in short, controlled bursts. Messerschmitts drop from above, firing, climbing, turning. Contrails twist into knots. Smoke trails lengthen and fade. Fragments glitter briefly before falling away. To someone beneath, it will look like scribbles drawn across the sky, like a child's chalk lines in white and grey. To you, it feels like an entire island's will, focused into a single, enormous effort. The RAF is not holding back today. Reserves are committed. Squadrons are turned around with brutal speed. The whole system stretches toward its limit, but refuses to break. Civilians looking up. Down in the streets and fields, people watch the spectacle overhead, with a mix of fear and awe. In a South London neighbourhood, two boys lie on their backs in a patch of scrub grass, eyes wide, tracking the weaving formations. A man delivering bread stops his bicycle in the road, one hand still on the handlebars, mouth slightly open as he watches. A bomber trailing smoke limp westward. A woman hanging washing in a garden lets the sheet slip from her fingers as she listens to the distant rattle of machine gun fire, like far-off sewing machines in the sky. They can't see each pilot, each maneuver, each narrow escape. All they see is movement and smoke, small shapes against a great height. But they feel something else too, a sense that, for once, the battle is not only descending on them, but being held above them. The sky is dangerous, but it is defended. In the operations room, a different view. Deep underground, in the bunker at Uxbridge, the day's battle plays out in markers and voices. WAF plotters move counters across the table map, with long wooden rods, eyes focused, backs straight despite the hours. Controllers call out, raid bearing 085, strength 100 plus. Multiple squadrons engaged, requesting reinforcement from 12 group. Phones ring. Orders are relayed. Information flows in a continuous loop. At the edge of the room, the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, stands quietly, watching the map with narrowed eyes. He asks occasional questions, receives brisk answers, and falls silent again, hands clasped behind his back. He sees squadrons committed, sees their positions shift, sees new raids forming, as others break up and scatter. At one point, he leans toward Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, and asks if Britain still has reserves. Park, eyes fixed on the map, answers simply, "There are none." For a moment, the room seems to tighten, but the plotters keep moving their counters. The controllers keep issuing orders. The system, exhausted as it is, continues to function. You watch Churchill's expression harden, not in despair, but in understanding. He will later put into words what this day truly meant, how much was carried by so few. But for now, he simply watches, listening to the quiet roar of coordination. The raids falter, and the tide bends. Above the city, the battle begins to tilt. Bombers break formation. Some jettison their loads early, to lighten their burden and turn back. Others press on, but with fewer escorts, as fighters peel away for fuel, or are drawn into desperate dogfights. RAF pilots, drained from repeated sorties, continue to press their attacks. One Hurricane dives through a broken formation, its guns blazing until they click empty. The pilot pulls up, glancing once at the battered bomber, falling slowly earthward, before climbing again toward another target. A Spitfire pilot, outnumbered, twists and turns in a series of tight, incredible maneuvers that leave his pursuers overshooting, their tracers streaming past empty air. The sky looks ragged now. Lines have dissolved into fragments. Smoke hangs in vertical columns. Parachutes blossom here and there, drifting down like pale seeds. For the Luftwaffe crews, the day becomes one of confusion. Radio calls mix. Fuel gauges drop toward red. London grows hazier beneath smoke and cloud. For the RAF, it becomes a day of near exhaustion, flying not on reserves of strength, but on reserves of will. When the last of the major raids turn back across the Channel, the sky feels both emptied and full, empty of enemy formations, full of the invisible weight of what has just happened. The tide has not turned in a single dramatic instant, but it has bent, and everyone, on both sides, feels it. Evening light on a worn-out island. By late afternoon, the guns fall silent, engines quiet, the smoke begins to thin. You stand on a rise overlooking the city and countryside, the sun lowering in a soft wash of amber. A damaged Spitfire limps home, one wing ragged, engine coughing gently. It manages to lower its wheels, touch down, and roll to an uneven stop. Ground crews run to meet it. The pilot lifts his canopy, face grey with fatigue, and manages a small, tired nod. On another airfield, pilots sit on the grass, helmets off, staring at nothing in particular. They are too tired to talk much. The shared quiet says enough. In London, people step cautiously from shelters, eyes searching the sky, as if expecting to see the day's struggle. Still written there, all that remains are faint contrails dissolving in the upper air. Later, in a speech that will echo for generations, Churchill will speak of this time, of these pilots, of how much was owed by so many to a small group of exhausted airmen. But right now, there are no grand phrases. There is only the low murmur of men comparing notes, the clink of tools as mechanics begin repairs, The rustle of evening newspapers printed quickly with early reports. The island has not won the war, but it has proved something vital. The sky can be attacked. It can be burned. It can be filled with metal and fear, but it does not have to break. As the sun sinks behind the horizon, you feel the day loosen its grip. Engines cool. Lights flicker on in houses and mess halls. The airfield grass darkens to soft blue. The Battle of Britain will continue. The Blitz will deepen. The nights will remain hard. Yet this day, this single, immense day, will live in memory as the moment when the island's spirit, and the sky above it, refused, quietly but absolutely, to yield. Somewhere in the distance, a lone aircraft drones home. It sounds small against the vastness of the evening. You listen until it fades, until only the wind remains, brushing gently over a country that, for all its scars, is still standing. The moment the invasion dissolved. The sea that waited for an army. October begins with an ordinary tide. Waves lap against the pebbled beaches of Kent. Seagulls drift over the grey horizon, their cries thin and wandering. A cold wind moves along the cliffs, lifting scraps of grass and forgotten paper. If you didn't know better, you'd think the sea was dreaming of nothing at all. But beneath the calm, you sense a history that almost happened, the invasion that never came. For weeks, the Channel was meant to carry fleets, barges, destroyers, landing craft, an armada of metal and men, crossing the narrow water, to break an island that refused to bow. In ports along the French coast, hundreds of river barges had been assembled. They bobbed in the swell, roughly modified, their engines groaning with unfamiliar strain. Soldiers had trained for the crossing, shoulders heavy with packs, boots coated in dockside mud, eyes glancing nervously at the dark line of water that separated them from an enemy shore. Artillery had been positioned, maps printed, timetables drafted. Even the tides had been calculated, with the precision of a watchmaker. But this morning, the Channel lies empty. The barges, once crowded and restless, sit abandoned, their paint peeling, their decks collecting rainwater. It is as if the sea itself has breathed out in relief, for the invasion, Operation Sea Lion, never left the planning rooms. It dissolved quietly, without a single soldier stepping onto British sand. The sky decided the sea's fate, and the sea, patient and expansive, accepted the verdict. The Luftwaffe begins to fray. Across the Channel, the strain inside Luftwaffe operations rooms has begun to show. Maps are still pinned to walls, routes still marked with colored grease pencils. Crews still gather around briefing tables, with blank notebooks and tired eyes. But something fundamental has changed. Confidence has thinned. Pilots speak in low tones, discussing fuel limitations, fighter escort problems, the endless circle of raids never quite breaking the RAF's spine. Bomber crews look older than their ages suggest, lines deepening around their eyes, hands trembling slightly, as they strap themselves into narrow spaces, filled with the smell of oil and cold metal. Losses mount. Stress mounts. Doubt becomes a quiet companion in every debrief. One navigator traces the channel with his fingertips, on a creased map, not with anticipation, but with dread. Another pilot folds his leather gloves too neatly, trying to keep his hands from shaking. The Luftwaffe has not collapsed, but it has frayed, not in bursts, but in threads pulled loose, by day after day of fighting, far from home, over waters that swallow wreckage whole. In their eyes, you no longer see inevitability. You see endurance, fatigue, a hope for the end of each shift, and in that shift of expression lies the beginning of the end. The RAF feels the weight ease, just slightly. On the British side, something equally subtle is happening. Not victory, not triumph, but a change in pressure. You stand on the edge of a dispersal field, where the grass is slick with rain, and the air smells faintly of distant smoke. Pilots sit outside the hut, exhausted but calmer than they've been in weeks. A few even manage small smiles, the kind that appear unbidden, after a long stretch of fear. Ground crews work steadily, still fast, still focused, but with a new sense of rhythm that feels less frantic, more sustainable. A mechanic rests his hand briefly on the side of a battered Hurricane, as if thanking it for one more safe landing. A squadron leader stands with his jacket unbuttoned, looking up at the sky, as clouds roll in low and grey. Weather has become a partner now. Bad visibility limits raids. Rain disrupts formations. Wind scatters bombers. Nature itself seems to give Britain brief moments of breath. And the RAF, tired, strained, aching, uses those breaths with quiet gratitude. Civilians learn a different kind of waiting. In London and along the coast, the civilian world adapts, not with resignation, but with familiarity. You walk through a market street, where stalls stand half-curtained, their goods covered with tarpaulins, in case the sirens sound. At a bus stop, a man reads a newspaper, with a hole burned through one corner, from a recent incendiary. Children skip along the pavement, their chalk games interrupted only when a bomber's engine passes high above. Women hang laundry, watch it sway in the breeze, and glance upward, as naturally as checking the weather. The Blitz has not ended, far from it, but the worst of the daytime raids has begun to ebb. Night remains dangerous, but day feels lighter. People notice it. They don't say it out loud. Superstition keeps them quiet, but you feel it in their pace, in the way they hold themselves, in the way they breathe. This is the strange in-between, after the hardest weeks. But before anyone dares to hope, life continues, wary but undefeated. Inside Churchill's war rooms. In the underground maze beneath Whitehall, where Churchill and his staff work, in cramped rooms lit by yellow bulbs, maps bloom across entire walls. Pins in red and blue mark every station, every raid, every squadron position. Radar charts hang beside weather reports. Telephones buzz and ring. Typists hammer at keys, with a rapid rhythm that feels like the heartbeat of the war. Churchill paces with his usual energy, one hand behind his back, the other holding a cigar. that burns slowly, ash dropping unnoticed onto the floor. He knows, in a way few others do, that something has shifted. The RAF is battered, but not broken. The Luftwaffe is powerful, but no longer confident. The invasion fleet still sits idle, its usefulness slipping away. With each day the air remains contested. Churchill listens to reports, frowns at casualty lists, makes notes on speeches, but at one point he pauses before a large map of Europe and simply stares, not at Germany, not at France, but at Britain, the small island that has held on. He does not smile. He rarely does on days like this. But his silence carries something that wordsmiths will later call defiance. A sky covered by cloud and possibility. October skies turn colder, lower, more unpredictable. You rise into the air with a flight of hurricanes that climb toward cloud cover so thick it feels like flying into wool. Visibility drops to a few hundred yards. The moisture clings to wings, tracing silver trails as the aircraft move. For the Luftwaffe, this weather is a hindrance. Formations scatter. Bombers lose their escorts. Targets become harder to find. For the RAF, it is protection, a fragile, shifting shield that blurs the enemy's vision. A pilot beside you wipes condensation from his canopy and mutters something under his breath, half complaint, half prayer. Cloud is no friend, but for now, it is not an enemy. The sky becomes a place where sound matters more than sight. The hum of engines in mist, the sudden flash of tracer fire, the thud of anti-aircraft guns, firing into obscurity. But the volume of battle is lower now, the density less crushing. The clouds swallow some of the violence, and in that swallowing, Britain breathes deeper. The Luftwaffe's turning point. By mid-October, the Luftwaffe faces the truth its commanders had not wanted to admit. Losses are unsustainable, pilot fatigue dangerous, aircraft spread too thin across too many missions. The plan to wear down fighter command has not succeeded. The raids on London have not broken morale. The shift to night bombing has not crippled industry or spirit. And the invasion fleet, the barges waiting impatiently in narrow harbors, begins to rot. Boats designed for rivers are not built for coastal storms. Several break moorings, others capsize in rough water. Autumn winds batter the channel, waves rise higher, tides turn unpredictable. Nature has begun to vote, and it does not vote for crossing. Inside Luftwaffe headquarters, voices grow quieter, arguments shorter, reports more grim. They all know, though few say it out loud, the window is closing, the chance is slipping, the invasion is becoming a ghost. A country that realizes it still stands. On the British side, realization dawns more slowly. People do not wake one morning and discover joy. The war is not over. Bombs will still fall. Cities will still burn. But something spreads quietly. Belief. The sense that the island is not doomed after all. That its enemies can be held. that the sky can be contested, that the sea can remain uncrossed. You walk through a small town, where the church bells ring at midday, not for celebration, not for victory, just for time, and yet, you feel something different in the sound, a clarity, a fullness, as though the bells recognize. They are ringing for a country, still alive. A shopkeeper sweeps debris from her doorway, with brisk, confident strokes. A butcher salts a cut of meat, while humming under his breath. Children chase one another, between sandbags stacked by the curb. Life continues, not in defiance, but in patience. The island has discovered endurance, as a form of quiet power. The day the threat recedes. By late October, the truth becomes official. Operation Sea Lion is postponed indefinitely. Never again will it be revived. As a serious prospect, you stand on the same hill from the chapter's beginning, watching the channel spread out below, in a long, shimmering slate-grey expanse. The sea looks the same as it always has, but everything beneath that surface, every fear, every plan, every possibility, has changed. Waves roll toward the shore, and collapse gently, unburdened. Far across the water, the ports that once held barges now sit quieter, their frantic activity replaced by slow, uncertain movements. The invasion has not been defeated. In a single dramatic moment, no great battle at sea, no clash of armies on beaches. It has been defeated by endurance, by fuel shortages, by weather, by coordination, by the will of tired airmen, and by the simple, unglamorous refusal of a country to collapse. You breathe in the salt air. The wind moves softly around you. The threat that hung over the island like a storm has begun to disperse into distant cloud. The invasion has dissolved, and Britain, worn and wounded, still stands. Epilogue. When the sky finally breathes again. The war does not end when the last raid fades from the sky. It lingers, in memory, in landscape, in the way people walk a little more slowly at dawn. But something subtle changes when the Battle of Britain finally loosens its grip. You stand now where the island breathes most clearly, on a quiet stretch of coast, the same coast that watched the summer unfold in smoke and fire, the same coast that listened for engines in the dark, the same coast where people once looked across the channel and wondered if an army would come. Today, the water lies calm. Waves slide over shingle with a hush so gentle. It feels like nature trying to soothe an exhausted land. The sky above you is pale, soft as worn paper, its clouds drifting like thoughts that no longer press too hard. You listen, really listen, and for the first time in months, you hear no distant engines, no drone gathering on the horizon, no hum that turns into fear, only wind, only sea, only silence, the kind of silence that arrives after endurance has done its work. You walk along the beach, your footsteps crunching lightly, and you begin to sense how the memory of this battle settled into the island like sediment, not through pride, though pride will come later, not through celebration, though medals will shine later, but through something quieter, gentler, more deeply human, relief, a relief that feels almost fragile, Because everyone knows the war is far from over. Europe remains consumed by fire. Cities still prepare for night raids. Families still live with uncertainty. And the world beyond Britain's shores is anything but peaceful. But in this small pocket of time, these few days, weeks, breaths, the island allows itself to stand still, just for a moment, just long enough to understand what it has done. You pause at the water's edge. The wind touches your face, cool and steady, as if it knows the story better than anyone else. The wind that carried smoke from Kent. The wind that pushed bombers off course. The wind that cleared the sky after the hardest nights. Nature was never a bystander. It was part of the struggle, sometimes harsh, sometimes merciful, and now it is gentle. You lift your eyes, and the past begins to settle around you, like dust illuminated in late afternoon light. You remember the pilots, faces tired, hands trembling as they tightened gloves, bodies running on little more than tea, adrenaline, and the need to protect something larger than themselves. You remember the ground crews, working until their fingers bled, patching bullet holes with metal plates, bending over open engines lit by lantern light. You remember the civilians, huddled in underground tunnels, singing quietly to keep fear from spreading, emerging each morning to sweep glass from their steps and straighten the frames of their windows. You remember the radar operators, eyes strained, voices steady, turning flickers on a screen into life-saving warnings. And you remember the sky, full of lines, of crescents of smoke, of silhouettes moving in impossible arcs. You do not have to imagine their courage. It is everywhere, lingering in the air, held in the silence that follows great storms. They were ordinary people. None of them asked to become history. Yet history gathered around them anyway, carried by wings and will. The island stood not because of one hero, or one moment, or one speech, but because thousands of quiet decisions were made day after day, to rise, to repair, to answer, to endure. You take a few more steps, the tide sliding up toward your shoes, and notice how the horizon softens into mist. The same channel that once threatened invasion now looks harmless, almost tender, as though holding its breath for a different reason, because peace, however distant, is still imaginable. Above you, a single gull drifts on the wind. Its wings move slowly, unhurried. The sky is no longer a battlefield. It is just sky, blue, endless, open. And in that openness, you sense what the people of 1940 must have felt, when the raids finally lessened, when the Luftwaffe turned inward, when the invasion fleet was dismantled, when the roar above them gave way to quiet, not victory, not triumph, but the ability to breathe again, a long, deep breath, carried across an island that had spent an entire summer refusing to fall. As you turn back from the water, the wind rises gently, lifting a strand of hair, brushing your shoulders with a touch that feels almost like reassurance. The war continues. Dark months lie ahead, but something fundamental has been proven to the island, to the world, and perhaps even to the sky itself. Courage can be quiet. Endurance can be steady. Small actions held together can shape the course of history, and sometimes the most important battles are won not by overwhelming force, but by the simple act of not giving way. The tide rolls in, then it retreats, then it rolls in again. Everything continues, everything begins again. Anew, standing at the edge of a long-ago autumn, listen to the sea breathe, and the sky soften, and the world settle around you, like the last notes of a fading song. This story, this quiet, enormous story, lives in memory, because it was carried not by fear, but by resolve, not by noise, but by stillness, not by certainty, but by the fragile belief that the future might still be shaped by the choices of ordinary people. The wind drifts past once more, soft and insistent, reminding you gently, you're listening to echoes of war.